Hi, I'm Paul Peterson.
I'm Chris Sun Liu. In part 3 of the Bureaucracy, we're going to talk about an important concept that political scientists have identified when they study bureaucracies, and those are the iron triangles. Professor Peterson, what is an iron triangle?
Well, the way political scientists have identified it, it's the relationship between bureaucratic agencies, interest groups, and congressional committees. They say their relationship resembles that of an iron triangle, something that you cannot change easily. Now, how does it work? Well, the interest groups have the votes and the money and the ability to complain about what needs to be done. And they go to Congress, and they don't go to Congress as a whole, they go to a particular committee in Congress. And that committee in Congress is heavily staffed with members from districts where that particular interest group resides. So, for example, if you think about farmers, they're the interest group. They want more help for farmers. So they go to the Agriculture Committee. And the Agriculture Committee is often heavily loaded with members of Congress from rural areas. So they're eager to help the farmers. So they complain to the bureaucratic agency, you need to ask for more money so that the farmers can get more benefits. And the bureaucratic agency says, well, that'll help us grow. So we're all for that. Well, up on top, you have the President of the United States who's worried about spending getting out of control. But all of these iron triangles are busy pushing their own particular agenda, and they're getting a lot of help from the interest groups and a lot of help over there on Capitol Hill. That is called the iron triangle.
Why do we have these iron triangles?
Well, Chris, we have iron triangles because power is divided between the President and the Congress. In European countries, power is concentrated within the executive branch, and the bureaucracy has to report to the Premier or the Prime Minister. The Parliament, the National Assembly, doesn't have much control over what's going on in the bureaucratic side of government. But in the United States, power is divided between the President and the Congress.
Now, I understand why the President controls the bureaucracy, but why and how does Congress control the bureaucracy?
Congress has two important tools for controlling the bureaucracy. One is the power of appointment, and two is the power of the budget.
Let's talk about these two in more detail. First, the appointment power. What power does Congress have in confirming appointments, and how does this give it influence in the bureaucracy?
Well, it's the Senate that has the most power over presidential appointments because you have to get a majority on Capitol Hill to approve the appointment. And they can hold up appointments to the bureaucracy for a considerable length of time if they're unhappy with the appointment that the president has made. And it's also the case that senators are expected to be able to control the appointment if it has an impact on their state, and they're the senior senator from that state. So if a senator is in the Democratic Party and there's a Democratic president, that Democratic senator is going to have a lot of power over who gets appointed to the bureaucracy within their state. And then it takes just a long time for appointments to make it through the Senate.
On average, how long does it take for these appointments to be confirmed? And how does this affect the workings of the national government?
Well, Chris, you would be amazed to learn that it can take months and months for an appointment to make its way through the bureaucracy, even when a new president comes into office and you think everybody's eager to support the new president. So it took the Ronald Reagan administration the longest time to get their appointees appointed and or confirmed by the Senate. It took up to 10 months. Obama's had a little, or when he was first in office, he had a little more luck. It took about 6 months. But even so, it's a half of a year. Now remember, these inners and outers will disappear on average at the end of 3 years. So the first half year that they're in office or longer, they're going to be temporary appointees and don't have the full authority that comes with a confirmed appointment.
Are there any examples of this system with appointments being held up for an extended period of time, having real consequences?
Probably the best example, Chris, is what happened in 9/11, why the bureaucracy was so unprepared for that terrorist attack. When a commission reviewed all the causes that contributed to the United States not paying enough attention to what was happening, one of the key things they looked at was the new team that was on the job. It had barely won confirmation from the Senate. It was barely in place when 9/11 occurred, just 8 months after the president had taken office. So what they said was, since a catastrophic attack could occur with little or no notice, we should minimize as much as possible the disruption of national security policymaking during the change of administrations by accelerating the process for national security appointments. Well, this is something that the United States government needs to pay attention to, because one of the high-risk periods for an attack on U.S. assets comes when there's a change in office in the presidency, when a new president comes into power.
Confirmation of appointments is one way Congress can get its hooks into the bureaucracy. What's another way it can do that?
The other way, and probably even more important way, is its budgetary control over the bureaucracy. As we discussed in the Iron Triangle discussion, Congress is split up into committees and subcommittees, and the interest groups are strongly represented within those committees, and they can make sure that agencies are responsive to Congress if they expect to get the resources they need to operate as an agency. It's also possible for Congress to add earmarks to legislation that specifies exactly how the money is to go. One of the classic examples is the Bridge to Nowhere in Alaska, where a beautiful, lovely bridge was built over one of the fjords in Alaska that went to a little island that was hopefully going to be developed into a major tourist attraction. But that didn't happen, and so it was a bridge to nowhere. And now there's been a lot of pressure to reduce the number of earmarks that Congress can add to legislation, but there's so many ways to get around any particular rule that Congress is still able to write a lot of specifics into the laws that they pass.
Are iron triangles equally present in different departments of the government?
I think it makes sense to divide the government into the inner cabinet and the outer cabinet. The inner cabinet consists of those 4 departments of the government that existed at the very beginning, back in 1789, when the U.S. government was first established. State, Treasury, Justice, War, or the Defense Department, were the initial 4 departments of the government. And they have key critical operating functions that every government has to have. That's the inner cabinet. The interest groups play a lesser role in the operations of these agencies. Where the interest groups prosper is with the outer cabinet. The outer cabinet has been added. These departments have been added to the government at the behest of interest groups. It was the timber interests and the miners who wanted a Department of the Interior. It was the Farm Bureau and other farm groups who wanted a Department of Agriculture, and so on down the list. Chamber of Commerce and the Commerce Department, the AFL-CIO, the 2 big labor unions, wanted the Labor Department, and so on down the list, as you can see. So every one of those outer cabinet departments are at risk of being under the control of the interest groups that they serve. Now, here's a little map of Washington, D.C., which is a guide to how the departments actually work. You can see on this map that the inner cabinet, whether it be the State Department or the Office of Management and Budget, which is supposed to control all of the departments, or if it's the Justice Department, these tend to be located close to the White House, as is the Treasury, which is right next door. But the outer cabinets, the outer departments that make up the rest of the cabinet, like the Department of Education or Health and Human Services or Labor or Transportation, they're actually closer to Capitol Hill. So the way the departments have sort of arranged themselves in Washington, D.C. actually tells you which part of government they feel the closest to.
As you said, many of these departments are influenced by their group allies. But these are the departments. What about the independent regulatory agencies? Are the iron triangles at work there too?
Well, you would think that they were independent because that's the name, right? The independent regulatory agencies. But if anything, they're worse. Regulatory agencies have boards, and boards are entities that tend to capture attention from interest groups because they can get their members onto that board. So if you look at all these independent agencies, whether it be the Security and Exchange Commission or the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission or the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation or any one down the list, they all have their constituency. They all have the interest groups that support them.
Have we seen any changes in the way the iron triangles work?
Well, some people say that we've gone from iron triangles to issue networks. I think that's partly true. It's not entirely true, but here's an example of what they mean. The Atomic Energy Commission historically was totally controlled by the big four of the nuclear power industry, four large corporations that were responsible for the generation of nuclear power in the United States. And they had inside access to the Joint Commission on Atomic Energy, a congressional committee that comprised members from both houses. And that was a very tight, impenetrable iron triangle until there was a nuclear disaster on 3 Mile Island. And after that, the atomic energy system, the nuclear energy system, opened up, and many more voices were allowed to the table. So that definitely happened in this case, and as a result, we haven't built very many nuclear power plants since, even though some people think we have to do so if we're going to avoid global warming. But the opposition has won a voice at the table, so it's now thought that this is an issue network, not an iron triangle. And you can find other examples of the same phenomenon inside Washington. But I think it's too early to declare the day of the Iron Triangle totally dead.
In the end, Professor Peterson, who does the bureaucracy report to? The president or Capitol Hill? And what are some of the key takeaways here?
Well, of course, the bureaucracy reports to both. The president does have control. The president does make the appointments. The president, if he truly insists on something, can get his way. But those departments have a lot of ability to work behind the scenes, and the interest groups are very powerful forces, and the president has a limited amount of attention. And most of the time, when it's working in the quiet spaces of government and not in the center of attention that the media gives some issues, Congress is playing a very important role.
That's it for our lecture on the bureaucracy. Next, we'll move on to civil liberties.